how about I talk about what happened yesterday here in the Kyiv area? Yesterday, we had a drone attack on the capital. And I believe at the end of it, it was about 75 drones, Shahed drones that the Iranians originally designed, and then they sold them to the Russians, and then the Russians started making them, and now the Russians are firing them at Kyiv and other major cities all the time. And they're cheaper than, say, like the Iskanders or the Caliber missiles or any of the cruise missiles, and so they can fire these in greater amounts to try to strain down Ukrainian air defense systems or target, infrastructure that might be facilitating the war or facilitating, just daily Ukrainian life. And so they fired about 70 to 75 drones at the city, and I was in the city during the attack, and so I thought might as well talk about it since I was there. So what was going on is I was playing Crusader Kings 3, as all great stories start with that sentence. And, I was fabricating claims on the other duchies that I obviously deserved. And then we started to hear the usual hum. See, the thing is about these Shahed drones is they sound like a lawnmower, like flying through the sky. It's a really distinct sound that's different than, say, the Caliber missiles or like a fighter jet. It's kind of hard to mistake. And once you've heard it a few times, you can probably identify it in any case. When I've been out in the countryside and in these countryside villages around Kyiv, these drones would have to pass over the village house that I was in order to get to Kyiv. And so sometimes they would intercept them in the area. And so what would be happening is the area that we were living, the air defense would be trying to shoot it down before it gets to Kyiv, because that's where the dense urban environment is. That's where there's more civilian. That's where there's more infrastructure. And so you want to knock it out before it gets there, its intended target. That does mean that you could hear it passing over the village houses all the time. And we have streamed when that has been going on before. And I think I've posted that footage. Somebody can dig it up and share it about if they want to see it. But it also means that it's more likely to get intercepted in that area. In that village house I was staying at actually once had one of those Shahed drones get shot down in the backyard, and the security cam footage shows it. I never posted that because it would dox, the village house, but that was pretty, it was an interesting afternoon. Anyway, here I am. I hear that recognizable sound, and the alerts come on, error alert. And I didn't know how many it was going to be, but I was nervous. And the reason I was nervous is because with winter basically here, we're going into October now, it's Halloween season, fall is upon us. If you were the Russians and you wanted to target Ukrainian electrical infrastructure, heating infrastructure, the stuff that is necessary to sustain life in Eastern Europe and a place like Ukraine where it gets quite damn cold during the winter, now would be the time to do it. You don't wait till December. You don't wait till Christmas to start doing it. You do it right at the start, at fall, when it's going to be most important. Mind you, Ukraine has already lost, I believe 80% of its electric power plants. Many of the facilities that were necessary, and I heard, sometimes people say, oh, just transfer in more electricity. Well, that would be easy if the Russians hadn't blown up the facilities that the Ukrainians would usually use to transfer said electricity. Earlier in the year, it was much worse. I was here 4 or 5 months ago filming, and we had to get an echo flow. We had to do all this stuff to try to sustain us with power because the power outages were constant. We'd get 12 hours of power, maybe sometimes 8 hours of power, 16 if you're lucky, and then the rest of that time would be out. And the only way they could sustain the system was by having that cycle, was by having these blackout times that they would schedule, but the schedule was not always accurate, in order to try to keep the system afloat to some capacity. That's how bad it got. Now, if it's summertime, and the worst thing that comes from that is that, you have to get a fan or something and go if that's the worst that comes of it, what of it? But when you're talking about wintertime, where many people need electricity in order to get heat, where many people need that power in order to be able to live in their apartment because it gets that cold, especially if you go out in eastern Ukraine, where the Russians are much closer in range of many of these things. If you look at Pokrovsk, one of the first things the Russians ended up hitting once they were in range was the electricity generation, which of course not only is helping the local troops, but is also supporting local civilian life. Those who are going to need heat in order to live there, even though the vast majority of the civilian population has already long left the city. I'm going to be releasing an article on Pokrovsk with offbeat research from an embed I did over there with a grad rocket team attached to the 59th not too long ago. Well, not too long ago, it's like a month or something ago now, but still, most of the information is pretty up to date. And I'm just waiting for it to release and the footage to get okayed so we can release that article. The point is, though, they're targeting the electrical infrastructure. And so that's what the attacks seem to be focused on. And as they came in, you could hear these Shahed drones getting closer. You could hear the 1 second. I cannot play, I cannot show you guys any footage of anything for a few reasons, but I'll just be simple with it. If I was to show you any of the air defense systems working, which I, of course, do not have footage of, I only have audio, but if I was, I could go to prison. And the reason would be that because by posting those air defense system videos, you could end up compromising Ukrainian defense, because then the Russians would see where the air defense systems are working, and then they simply target the air defense. Now, if you're talking about those like trucks with the machine, the dushkas on top that just firing at the sheets as they're coming in, that's not much of a concern. But if you're talking about a Patriot air defense system that's very expensive, you don't got a lot of missiles for it, and the aid is already running short on that, well then, yeah, you've got a problem. But it's a hard rule for everything, so I can't play the footage. I can play some audio though, at least I believe so. So let's see if I can get some audio up. Huh. It's very low, it's very hard to hear. Well, I can just tell you what I heard. It's not really good audio. I wish I had better audio. I did not have my camera ready because I was not planning to film air defense system. Just recorded on my phone. What happened is I heard the humming get closer and closer and closer. I look out my apartment window because that's the smart thing people do during air raid sirens is look out their apartment window and not go in the corridor. Don't do that. I'm an idiot, okay? I'm the fucking moron that traveled out here to film all this, right? So I look out my apartment window. And then as I'm hearing these Shaheds get closer and closer and that recognizable buzz like a lawnmower flying over, I then see the sparks going across the sky of Ukrainian air defense systems working to shoot these things down, and the lights, the big searchlights that they put into the sky to identify them. See, earlier in the war, the Shaheds used to be white. The Shaheds were white, making them a lot easier to spot during the nighttime. And so the air defense teams had some ability to spot them. Problem is now the Russians are painting them all black and then launching them at like 2 a.m. So there's no sunlight. There's nothing to spot them without, the only thing you got really is to go off of is your hearing. So they got the searchlights to try to spot them before they can knock them down. So you see the searchlights, you see the firing going out. Just like, they just look like streaks across the sky, almost like somebody took a sparkler and launched it at 1,000 miles an hour. And it's so clear to see because it was so dark, these orange sparks going across the sky. And then you see the flashes of different Shaheds going down. And to be honest, the way it looks from a distance, definitely when you can't see it directly and you can only see the reflection from like behind, like it's semi-covered by a building, or it's kind of hard to see because of, just kind of covered some bit by clouds or fog. It almost feels like a giant firefly lighting up in the distance. Because it's not really like a fireball, because unless you directly see it and it's really close, and plus the warheads are not that gigantic. It's mostly it looks like almost if somebody turned on a giant flashlight and turned it off again really quick. And after it must have been like 2 hours. It was for a bit because they were launching them in waves, and they weren't just launching them all in one path either. They'd launch one in one path. They'd have another change paths and try to come at the city from the west. So they would curve around and pass over the local village homes and then turn to try to hit it from the other side as they were trying to hit the electrical infrastructure. I will say one thing I suspect is if you knock out 80% of a country's electrical capacity, its ability to produce electricity, and you narrow it down to less and less facilities, While on one hand, obviously that's terrible because it strains the system, it makes it much harder to manage, it's expensive, of course, blowing up these facilities comes with risk to personnel and all the negatives that come with that. It also means you have less systems to defend with air defense. Anyway, after about 2.5 hours of watching intermittent streaks go across the sky, the big fireflies lighting up, and listening to the constant hum of what sounded like my grandfather mowing in the backyard, the attack ended. It was about 75 drones, of which I believe 67 or 68 or 69, something 60 something, in the high 60s, got shot down by the Ukrainians. And this is something that most people just kind of have gotten, I mean, I don't want to say used to, but, you know, when it happened, it wasn't really, I almost didn't talk about it today. And the reason I didn't talk about it is because this happens pretty often. And it's going to happen probably more often now that we're going into winter and they really want to take out the electrical infrastructure. The last time I talked about this happening, and I don't talk about it because it's not happening. It's happening all the time. It's just the last time I talked about it was when they took out the children's cancer hospital in Kyiv, because I heard that missile go right over my fucking apartment block. And it was terrible thinking that sound ended up terrifying and terrorizing those children. And that's the last time I talked about it, because that was an international news story. And just the barbaric nature of bombing a cancer hospital for children. But I mean, I feel like, you know, when these things happen every once in a while, I should at least remind you guys that they're happening. It's the same reason why now, instead of just ignoring the air raid sirens, I acknowledge it on stream. I miss my crab cakes. I miss my crab cakes immensely. It's one of my, if not my most favorite meal.